I've got a couple more exercises to go, so let's go right to them. I'll switch off to the side stretches. Now, just like before, I can change the copied original dad file that we had where he's just standing still, and I can double-click it and work on this new animation. Since these started off as both copies, it looks like I'm looking at the same one, but I can see I'm working on the dad's side stretches file right up here. Now with the side stretches, we're going to do pretty much the same thing we did last time. I'm going to need some keyframes to make some changes to the poses. And I'll just set a couple of sets of keyframes up right here just like before. One in the middle and one at the end. And we'll jump right to our middle ones. And we'll change this pose out. For a side stretch, I'm going to have his left leg bend at the knee and crouch down. His right leg will stretch out, and we'll just have his arms stretch out to the side and give him a little bit of a lean. Now to accomplish that, I'm just going to pick out the pieces that we need to work with. Actually, I'm going to grab everything except for the bottom of his left leg and his shoe. I'll use Shift-click to get rid of those two. We can use Shift for selecting as well as deselecting. Now I'll take the remaining pieces and I'll move them down so he goes into that crouch. Then we'll just set his knee up so that he's bending it out to crouch into that position. So I'm just going to lean that one piece over. Let's see, we'll take his thigh in a second. Make sure he's kind of bending at the ankle there. And I'll rotate his thigh out to match that as well. Okay, so there we've got a pretty good bend going on with his leg. Maybe a little tiny bit more there. Now his other leg, we're going to have that rotate up and stretch out to the side. So I just need to select all three of those pieces. Now when I've selected more than one piece, I can change that rotation point like we did earlier. So since I have all three pieces of his leg moved, I should be able to stretch this out. And that's kind of in line with his first foot. Let's set up the upper body now. I'm going to grab all of these pieces, both arms, his torso, and his head. And to start with, I'm going to lean them over because he's got to lean into this stretch. Okay. We'll give him a lean that looks like it works with that line of his body there. Very easy pose. And I'll just grab the hands. I got more than one object, so I'll change that rotation point. Stretch his arm out and give it a little straighten so he doesn't look like he's Rubber Man there. Okay, so we're doing kind of the same thing. Working with our little puppet parts of all the figures of the dad and just putting our poses together to match what we'd like him to be doing. Need a little bit more rotation in that one, I think. There we go, that's a nice straight arm. Let me get the other one set up. And of course, when we finish this, we're going to set up our tween so that we can have the computer calculate the intermediate positions of all of these parts and fill in the gaps. Okay, so a little arm straightening going on here. I'll pull his hand up into the cuff. And let's see what we've got. I've got him up and then down into his lean. I'm going to set up all of those in-between frames all at once by selecting both the first set and the second set with a shift. And I've got all these keyframes selected. Now I can also set my tween up down here in the property menu and I'll get the same thing. We've been making motion tweens for these. And let's see what we've got. There he is, kind of crouching in. We've got one more exercise to do, so let's go ahead and grab that and we'll get that done. Our jumping jacks. Now for this one, he's going to jump up in the air, stretch out his legs, and raise his arms up to his head. I think what would be better in this one is if we do two sets of keyframes instead of just one. Since he's got to move his arm all the way around, I'm going to set up an intermediate position where he's got his arms stretched out to the side, and then he raises it up over his head. Now that'll give us a little bit better motion here. So we'll just drop in our keyframes like before. I've got one set for him raising his arms out, and one set for where they're going to go over his head. Now I'm going to need him to return back down to this position, so I'll set our last keyframe set up while we have him unmoved, and that way we'll have him returning right back to the position he was before. So I'll insert one more set there. Now let's set up this intermediate position. I want his arms stretched out, and I want him jumped up into the air a little bit. Now I just want to get a little ground reference so I know when he's hopped off the ground and when he reaches back into it again. So I'm going to pull out another guide from our ruler and set that down at his feet. Once again, that's going to be an invisible marker, so it won't show up in our movie, but I can at least get his feet back down to the position where he's supposed to be. For our second set of keyframes, I'm going to have him jump up in the air a little bit. So I'm just going to take all the parts of the dad character and just move him up a little bit, and we're just going to quickly rotate him out. His legs should extend out to the side a little bit. So I'll grab all three, and using my transform tool, I will change his rotation point and rotate that leg out. Do the same thing for the other one. We'll rotate his leg right on out there so he's kind of jumped up into the air and spread his legs. He's going to have his arms stretched out to the side. So we're going to do a very similar rotation we did before. Straighten his arms out. And take that bend out. Bring his hand on up. Let's do the other arm. Okay, this is going to be our intermediate position. And his final position, we're just going to take all of these elements and straighten them out. I think I'd like his hand out a little bit so it kind of looks like that stretch. And now we'll take this final position, and it actually might be easier if I started from that mid position. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of these keyframes that we've dropped in. I'll use my Control-click context menu, or that would be right-click on the PC, and I can clear those frames very easily. And by starting from this set of frames, if I just reinsert the keyframes, it'll copy from this set instead of this set. That's going to be a lot easier because we won't have to do all this arm straightening that we had to do in setting that first set up. Now it should be much easier because I can take the straight arm position of all of these parts and rotate them straight on up. I'll change that rotation point to his shoulder again, and we'll just raise him up over his head a little bit. Same thing from the other side. Now he's going to pull his legs in just a tiny bit and land on his feet. So we've got to not only do a little bit of a rotation here, but we've got to have him plant his feet back on the ground. So I'll just grab the left leg after the right leg. Grab that in there. There we go. Rotate it in just a touch. And I'll grab the whole character, and we'll have him drop back down to the ground. Now we have that nice guideline specifying where the ground point is for us. If I want to have him re-hit that intermediate point in the middle of him coming back from his jumping jack, what I'd need to do is copy these over here. And I'm going to use a keyboard technique for that. I'm going to hold down my Option or my Alt key on the PC, drag these over, and you can see the plus sign on my selection cursor. That indicates that I'm going to copy, and I'll make a copy of those. So now we've got a much more complex animation where he stretches his arms out, jumps up over his head, comes back down again. Once again, I'm going to use the Motion Tween feature to set all of those up so that the computer figures out intermediate spaces for each one of those frames, and we have a smooth animation of him jumping up and down. Okay, so without too much work and a few keyframe pose settings, we've got our dad running through the paces of 3 complete exercises.